I don't think it's really appropriate now to conceptualize what's happening around the world, but particularly in the West, in political terms precisely, because it's something deeper than what's merely political. And one of the ideas I've been toying with, I'd like your opinion about it, is that the default human moral stance is probably left-wing. Ben Shapiro said something to me at one point, just off the cuff, that tangled its way into my thinking, and I suppose is one of the motivations for this idea that he said he's a communist in his family. And so, if you have a family, if you have children, you're really hoping for something like, at least a part of you is hoping, especially when they're kids, for something like equality of outcome. You want everyone to do well. You're willing to intervene on the side of the person who's, who's not quite as successful at any given moment. You want to distribute resources as equitably as possible. Your interaction with your children and your wife is based on essentially an ethos of care. But, if you look at organizations that move beyond the scope of the family in size, that ethos of care and equitable care, let's say, doesn't scale well. And modern civilizations are not families. And here's some proof of that from the psychological perspective. So the personality trait agreeableness is associated with maternal care, let's say. It's the dimension of empathic, self-sacrificial care. And women are substantially higher in trait agreeableness across the world than men. What predicts success in a complex society on the personality side isn't agreeableness. In fact, managers who are more agreeable do worse because people take advantage of them. What predicts success on the personality side in a large-scale society is conscientiousness. And conscientiousness is dutifulness and industriousness and orderliness. And it's the ethos of hard work. It's a meritocratic ethos. And it's a cold virtue. Like, to be conscientious isn't the same as to be emotionally caring. And so I wonder if part of the reason that the politics of the left, so to speak, constantly mutate and transform, they're immune to criticism, say, by reference to history. You can't just say, well, every communist regime in the 20th century was a brutal, bloody, dictatorial disaster. It doesn't hold water. Maybe it doesn't hold water because it's actually extremely difficult to socialize people so that they can take their place in a complex society without defaulting to the underlying ethos of familial care. And so if you're a harsh and discriminating person, if you're very meritocratically oriented, if you say to someone, I don't give a damn about your feelings, it matters what sort of job you do, you're a harsh voice, and you might be a necessary voice to keep civilization itself running, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily an attractive voice, especially to people who think instinctively in terms of an ethos of care. And it's very, very easy to appeal to that. And so I think part of the problem, and then you might add to that another problem. So imagine that if you're driven by necessity when times are hard, it becomes obvious that those who can should be allowed to do, or should be pushed forward to do, that the meritocratic have to rise to the top because otherwise disaster looms. If you've been in a situation where economic security has been granted to you in some ways effortlessly for several generations even, it's also perhaps much easier to default to that ethos of care and to attend to the outliers in society who haven't served themselves well, but also perhaps haven't been served well by the conscientious ethos. And so I'm wondering about your thoughts of that, because we usually think about this, well, some people have left-wing beliefs and some people have right-wing beliefs, and that's the battlefield. It's like, I don't think that's a good level of analysis because I don't exactly think this is about ideas. I think the default human position might be equality of outcome. in small groups, and that you have to struggle against that mightily with your education system, maybe your moral system as a whole, to impose a meritocratic, like a cold virtue meritocracy on top of that. And obviously we haven't been doing a very good job of that. So I'm curious, you're well versed in the Austrian School of Economics. I'm wondering what you think of that kind of theorizing.
No, I fully agree. And this is really interesting because Friedrich Hayek wrote a paper called The Mirage of Social Justice, where he argued exactly what you are saying. He said that this idea of social justice, that we had to, redistribute wealth so everyone gets an equal share, or in terms that guarantee the survival of the community. It's an idea that he attributes to our past. For thousands of years, we were small communities, tribes, basically. We had this family ethos, the care ethos, and it was the way to survive. But we were communities only of a couple of dozen people, or maybe over 100, but not more than that. You knew everyone, and this is the instincts. He says we evolved in this type of environment, and so socialism in the end wants to apply this moral instincts to what he called the complex society, the larger society, which is civilization basically. And that's why you have this regression towards tribalism, and you have it with socialism and communism and with nationalism. When nationalism is exacerbated, like the Nazis did in Germany, then you go back to the tribe and you feel protected by the tribe, and you have this unifying rhetoric and this identity, and you are, like you are again like this organism, and you are part of a whole. You are not just an individual looking for yourself. And this is the care ethics ethos that you were talking about. And it's really interesting also because Gerald Cohen, who was a very famous Marxist, a professor at Oxford University, he said, he wrote a book, Why Not Socialism? And by socialism, he didn't mean Nordic type of welfare state or something like that. He meant like really equality of outcomes, more or less. And he was saying, and he said that the instinct, the socialist ideology, or the socialist philosophy appealed to an instinct that was so ingrained in human nature that it was going to come back over and over and over again. So I fully agree with that analysis, and this is why civilization is so fragile.
Okay, let me add 2 data points to that, or 3. So we did a study in 2016 looking at personality and cognitive predictors of politically correct authoritarianism. So that wouldn't be democratic socialism, that would be the far left authoritarian types. And the things that predicted it were low verbal intelligence, which was a walloping predictor. So you could imagine it's a very simple narrative, right? There are victims and there are victimizers. That explains everything. And if you're moral, you're on the side of the victims. And that's something like a predatory infant instinct, right? There are predators, there are infants. You're obviously on the side of the infants, and to hell with the predators. So you can think of that as an instinctual orientation, and an effective one under certain conditions. Okay, what else predicted? Feminine temperament, high agreeableness in particular. And then there's the other data point I would say is that if you look in the United States right now, the people who are holding the radical utopians in power are women between 18 and 34. Okay, and now they're particularly targeted by the Iranians and the Chinese on TikTok, right? And they're bombarded with images, for example, of dying Palestinian children. And that's a targeted attack. We know that the Iranians are behind that, and the Chinese, and it's extremely effective. And women between the ages of 18 and 34 are wildly discordant in their political views in relationship to everyone else. Now, 50% of them are also childless. Right, so there's an element of the maternal instinct run amok on the political landscape, because you could easily say, and I don't think that it's an exaggeration, and our empirical data has supported that, is that that maternal instinct is going to find its target. It's going to find its expression. If it doesn't find its expression within the confines of a family, where there's some real demand to take care of those who are unable to take care of themselves, children, essentially, infants primarily, then it's going to find its expression politically. And that can be exploited, as it certainly is by the Chinese and the Iranians on TikTok. And so the battle that we're engaged in politically, I believe, is better construed in the manner that we just described. It's a battle between an instinctive orientation towards care and a higher order cognitive interpretation that's associated with conscientiousness that notes how complex systems operate and introduces a different standard, which would essentially be something like the cold-hearted meritocratic standard. Okay, so you see a parallel between that and what the Austrian school economists proposed. Okay, that's what I thought. So okay. So that's that. I'm going to bang that around in the back of my head.